What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper video. Today we're going to look back over the last couple of weeks with Phyrexia, All Will Be One, and take a look at the impact it's had on Pauper Constructed. I'm going to highlight the top 3 decks with the biggest changes, biggest impacts, or overall just best showcases of some of these new cards. Alright, our very first showcase is actually a deck that most of you following Pauper Constructed will probably be familiar with. It is incredibly complicated, but this is Tron, also known as Tron or Tron. This is actually the newest version, which is a fusion of both. This deck is popularized by Kalikaz, otherwise known as Sidine Rakan. I guarantee I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but is a phenomenal Pauper combo brewer. And this deck is all about comboing Myr Retrievers with Ashnod's Altar and making infinite storm triggers to then resolve a Weather Storm for infinite mana. Golem Foundry, which allows you to make infinite 3/3s, which then translates into infinite mana. There's a lot that this deck can do. But at its shell, it is a Tron deck. It's running a full 4 of each of the Urza lands, Tower, Power Plant, and Mine. It's running a Takasia's Dig Site as a small utility land, as well as a few Crystal Grottos for those scries. It's running your standard artifact package with Chromatic Star. It's using Conjurer's Baubles as the eggs, Energy Refractor to filter mana, and Ichor Wellspring to continue to draw cards, comboing with Deadly Dispute and Reckoner's Bargain. Now, the deck also runs a little bit of recursion in Blood Fountain. And you're looking at that right, you're not crazy. There are no expedition maps in this list. It relies solely on crop rotation to allow you to find your Tron pieces. Now, this deck operates off of a lot of synergies and a lot of combos, makeshift munitions along with your infinite mana, infinite sacrifices, and infinite golems allows you to generate infinite damage. But the core of the deck operates off of this Myr Retriever Ashnod's Altar combo. Now, what improvements were made to this deck from Phyrexia All Will Be One? Well, we got a new Myr Kinsmith, which actually allows you to search for a Myr. Now, this made a huge impact on this deck because it allows you to effectively have 2 additional Myr Retrievers in your deck. Since you need 2 of them, it's the only combo piece you need 2 of, having an additional 2 in the deck that allow you to tutor for what you need, especially because 1 Kinsmith gets a Myr Retriever, sacrifices itself to Ashnod's Altar to make 2 mana. You play the Myr Retriever. You sacrifice the Myr Retriever, you get 2 of that mana back. The Myr Retriever's ability gets Myr Kinsmith back. If you pay 2 more mana, you can Myr Kinsmith again to find another Myr Retriever, which allows you to sacrifice the Myr Kinsmith, play the second Myr Retriever, and start your loop. So all you really need to draw is 1 Kinsmith, which is incredibly good for this deck's acceleration. The deck also has a little bit of utility in Foundry Inspector for a second combo using your Conjurer's Baubles to loop infinitely once you have no cards in deck. The deck also runs a singleton Mystical Teachings as a small toolbox so that you can find your Weather Storms, crop rotations, deadly disputes, and whatever else you may need during the course of the game. Out of the sideboard, we have a couple of Krark Clan Shamans for the ever-present red deck and a lot of these token productions that are running rampant in Pauper Constructed right now. We have a single Ancient Grudge. This is primarily just going to stop Affinity, or at least put a small amount of pressure on Affinity, but ultimately that's a pretty good matchup for you, so you don't need a whole lot of help there. Scattershot, this is again going to help with those wide creature and token-based decks. Also, it does allow you to wipe the board when you're comboing off, even when you don't have infinite damage from Makeshift. Serene Heart, this is primarily Boggles tech. Extra Weather the Storms for that red deck matchup. Fangrim Marauders also for that red deck matchup, but primarily for some of the slower decks in Affinity. and things of that nature. We have an extra Golem Foundry in case you're expecting Artifact Hate to come in against you, so that you have additional golems. This also allows you to play sort of an aggro deck. There are quite a few games where Callie has played an early Golem Foundry and then just dropped a whole bunch of artifacts behind a Foundry Inspector in order to create 9, 12, even 15 power very, very quickly. And oftentimes that can just close out the game. And then finally we rounded out with Nihil Spellbomb. This is just 3 of and is very, very good in the metagame right now since so many graveyard synergy decks are rampant. Note for understanding how this deck works, Conjurer's Bauble also not only is just an egg for that secondary combo option, but it also acts as insurance for graveyard exiles against you. So you can always save your Myr Retriever with a Conjurer's Bauble or your Singleton Makeshift Munitions, what have you. So if they destroy something and are going to exile it, you can use a Conjurer's Bauble to save it. But all in all, this deck has gotten significantly better with the addition of Myr Kinsmith and showcases the power of one of these new cards very, very well. Next up, we have Boros Synthesizer. This deck was actually popularized by Heisen1, who posted the first winning result that I could find with it. But this is a play on the original Boros Synthesizer list. Boros Synthesizer being a synergy and tempo-based deck utilizing the shell of Core Skyfisher, Glinthawk, Experimental Synthesizer, with backup from things like Lightning Bolt, Galvanic Blast, and Makeshift Munitions. Now the deck is actually running a slightly more aggressive plan. It dropped the Thraben Inspectors and Seeker of the Ways of the past to make room for Monastery Swiftspears, Koldath the Rebirths, and the new card, Barbed Batterfist. Barbed Batterfist is an artifact equipment for 2 mana and 4 Mirrodin, which allows it to make a 2/2 Rebel creature token attached to it when it first enters play. And it gives the equipped creature +1/-1. So it allows you to make a 3/1 for 2 mana. But that's not the important part. The important part is when you pick it up, the 2/2 stays behind. So this deck combos with Glinthawk and Core Skyfisher to make a whole bunch of 2/2s out of this card, as well as combining that with Koldath the Rebirth tokens and the tempo of Monastery Swiftspear combined with Galvanic Blast and Lightning Bolt, and topping it off with Rally the Peasants to really steal some games. Rally the Peasants, of course, lets you give all of your creatures +2/+0 until the end of the turn, and it has flashback. So gone are the days of Seeker of the Way and Thraben Inspector. Now we're just trying to race them down and get them in. This deck is running a full 4 Glinthawks, the full 4 Experimental Synthesizers, 4 Galvanic Blasts, 4 Koldath the Rebirths, 4 Lightning Bolts, 4 Swiftspears, 4 Wellsprings, 4 Skyfishers, 4 Batterfists, 2 Makeshift Munitions, and 2 Rally the Peasants. Out of the sideboard, this deck has a little bit of tech. In a Singleton Relic of Progenitus, this is primarily just against those graveyard decks, although a lot of the times you're going to be faster than most of those decks. You just have to be aware of some of the more value-y strategies or infinite combos that you may need to disrupt with a relic. So you have one here, although there are some flex slots in the sideboard that we'll look at. You have a couple of red Elemental Blasts. This is really just to look at improving the Turbo Terror matchup or the mono blue tempo, since fairies are starting to swing back into the metagame. This is a good couple of cards in the sideboard to help keep those down. You, of course, have a Gorilla Shaman. This is targeting Affinity, as well as several other decks running the cheap artifact packages. And End the Festivities, which is in against Goblins. You have a Dawnbringer Cleric, which just kind of does everything. It allows you to gain life, it destroys an enchantment, or it exiles target card from a graveyard. Then you're running a full 4 Dust to Dust. Since you are primarily a combat-based deck, you really have to be able to deal with Affinity since you can't just combo them out. Dust to Dust is how we're going to do that. And why play this deck over, say, the mono red deck? What does this deck do better than Koldath the Red? Well, this deck gets access to some spicy tech and Honorable Scout. This card is a 1/1 human soldier scout for 1 white, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life for each black and or red creature target opponent controls. This is going to gain a ton of life, and because you can rebuy it with Skyfisher, it can get you lots and lots and lots of life in those matchups. So be aware that card could be windmill slammed in those matchups, and it'll gain a lot of life to shift the balance, and then combo that with the Rally the Peasants ability to really just steal games when your opponent is not expecting it. This deck has a lot of value, a lot of tempo. It has some great options out of the sideboard. With those flex slots, you have things like Molten Rain, Red Elemental Blast, Gorilla Shaman, and the Festivities, Dust to Dust, Honorable Scout, Relics. You've got so many relevant cards in the matchup right now, as well as a very solid aggro shell with Makeshift Munitions helping to edge you out in a lot of those matchups and get you some incremental value, as well as comboing Wellspring and Synthesizer for card value. So this deck really draws a lot of cards. It has a lot of pressure. It can go the distance by just making a whole bunch of 2/2s and going wide, and then it can steal games with Rally the Peasants. Deck is an A+ and showcases the power of Barb Batterfist really, really well. Last but not least is actually the deck that showcases the most new cards from Phyrexia All Will Be One. This is yet another brew by Kalikaz, and this is Poison Storm. So Poison Storm is a creatureless combo / control deck that looks to use the 2 new cards, Prologue to Pheresis, as well as Infectious Inquiry, to put poison counters on the opposing player without ever dealing combat damage to them, and then uses synergy out of Experimental Augury, Contentious Plan, and Vivisurgeon's Insight to then proliferate that player until they're dead. The deck makes an obnoxious amount of mana using Everflowing Chalice and Pentad Prism, as well as all of the depletion lands. These are lands that enter the play tapped, but with 2 depletion counters, and you can tap and remove a depletion counter to make 2 mana of a specific color. In this case, it's running the green, the black, and the blue versions. Combine that with Everflowing Chalice, getting charge counters, and Pentad Prism getting charge counters, making mana every time you proliferate. You can really start to generate lots and lots of mana. Now, this deck uses Careful Study, Contentious Plan, Experimental Augury, Prologue to Pheresis, Deep Analysis, Infectious Inquiry, and Vivisurgeon Insight to draw cards. There's a lot of card draw in this deck. And then there are a few utility spots, primarily in Snap, Echoing Decay, and Weather the Storm. These are all of your Don't Die cards, so that you can storm out, cast a whole bunch of spells, and then Weather the Storm for enough life to give you time to then play the rest of your spells to proliferate your opponent to death. The deck is very powerful, but it is weak to aggro, obviously, if it has no creatures and it's only running for Weather the Storms. Even with this much draw, sometimes you're just going to have games where you don't find it. That's really what the Echoing Decay is in here for. You've also got a couple in the sideboard. Looking at the sideboard, you've also got Hydroblasts, you've got Bring the Endings, another new card. Counters target spell unless its controller pays 2. But if they're corrupted, which means they have 3 or more poison counters, it just counters it. So a very, very good spell in this deck. As well as a Full Form Moments piece. This is another great fog variant coming in for those snaps and those Echoing Decays or what have you, maybe the Careful Studies. When you need them against the really aggressive decks, this helps you really slow the pace of the game and stall out, and then you have a couple Nihil Spell Bombs for those Graveyard Recursion and combo decks. All in all, this deck runs a whopping 23 new cards out of 75 from Phyrexia All Will Be One, and it is incredibly powerful, and it's a blast to play. If you haven't checked it out, definitely go check it out. Give it a try in a league and tell me what you thought. Hopefully these new decks really excite you and gives you something cool to try and play. I really hope you enjoy all of the Phyrexia All Will Be One new cards in the format, and are really excited to see where the format settles. I know I am. Let me know what's your favorite of the new decks, or at least the affected or boosted decks showcasing these new cards is down below in the comments. And as usual, guys, if you've made it this far in the video, please consider subscribing. It really does help the channel out, and it's something free you can do, so just go right down below, click the subscribe button. Thank you so much. As usual, guys, goodbye forever, unless I see you next time.